Imitation is often referred to as the sincerest form of flattery, and given the distinct lack of similarly bearded, overtly verbose, and extremely British people out there reviewing the latest and greatest in progressive rock and metal, I can only but assume that none of y'all are at the flattery stage with me just yet. But that's okay, because quite frankly, imagine wanting to be just like me, you poor unfortunate soul. However, on the flip side, OPETH must be blushing and getting all bashful and stuff when they hear this, the latest album from Sindar. As if you'd blindfolded me, spun me right round baby, right round like a record baby, and told me that this was a lost album from the interstitial period between Heritage and Watershed, I'd have bloody well believed you. Guys, gals, non-binary pals, my name is Ian, this is Rhyme Signatures, and we are once again opening the lid on the best new releases in prog rock and metal. Right, so my favourite thing about doing this whole YouTube nonsense is how it has changed the way that I discover and listen to new music. Once upon a while ago, I'd have pretty much stuck to my more well-known names and acts within my wheelhouse. It explains why in my mid-20s I went through a phase where all I'd really ever listened to was Dream Theater and not a whole lot of anything else. Now, I don't regret this period of limited sonic palette, shall we call it, as I was ultimately quite happy doing what I was doing, but looking back, I can't help but cringe at just how many amazing artists and albums just completely passed me by, as I was unwilling to colour outside of the lines I'd been setting for myself. But given that I do what I do here and endeavour to find smaller artists to shine a spotlight on, I often just go digging. Now, this can be in the form of promos that bands send to me, recommendations from friends, or my personal favourite, going to Bandcamp and clicking on random albums, forgetting entirely how I ended up with them in my browser window in the first place. Sindar was one such happenstance find, and I clicked it because I thought the album art was kind of cool, giving me a real Lord of the Rings mid-20th century schlocky fantasy vibe that I absolutely thrive on because I'm a massive goddamn nerd and a huge fan of early D&D, etc, etc. Never underestimate the power of good album artwork, guys, as it can and will draw people in. But of course I had no context as to what I was about to experience, no clue as to the kind of music that lay within. But by the time the fourth track kicked in, my Unga Bunga OPETH-Ian-like brainstem had been well and truly activated, and from that point on I was helplessly in the thrall of Tower of the Sun. My esteemed audience, if you ever wondered what Heritage would have sounded like if you ran it through a Tolkien filter and put back in some of the death metal elements of the mid-2000s, then you'd pretty much end up with this incredible little slice of independent progressive metal that I am delighted to be able to talk about today. Okay, so I've blabbed a bit here about how this is basically a lost OPETH album, but what exactly do I mean when I say that? And is there more to Sindar than just being a tribute act to one of Sweden's finest musical outgoings? Right, the similarities are quite stark right from the off. Opening track of Eclipse is full of all kinds of haunted melodrama and some very familiar guitar tones within its first minute that will instantly catapult the familiar into a kind of my arms your hearse territory, as will the incredibly Ockerfeldt-esque growls that make up about 25 to 30% of the vocal delivery on the album. It is familiar in a comforting way, though, rather than a derivative one, as OPETH have they've largely abandoned this side of themselves, albeit teasing at it again recently with last year's Last Will and Testament. It's always rather nice when we get to hear this type of sorrow-laden progressive death metal again. What Sindar have done, though, to differentiate themselves from the slew of bands out there who have been looking to fill the gap left behind by OPETH, is embracing a much more folky backbone, feeling more in part in places here like Wilderrun than anyone else at times, albeit with less theatricality and bombacity and more introspection and atmosphere. In truth, as much as I paint this band with the old Peth brush, there's far more of the atmospheric, more melodic and intimate side of progressive death metal in this album than anything else. For every track like Eclipse, Field of the Dead, and Inheritance, which explore their heavier, more brutal and aggressive sound, there's tracks like Greenfields, Nightingale, and Anor Tower of the Sun, which do the exact opposite. Light and shade have long been a favourite tactic of this kind of progressive death metal, blending elements of the scary and the dark with some diametrically opposing forces to highlight the existing part while the other lurks in the background waiting for its time to take the lead. Sindar have balanced this album extremely well around this idea, with the overall tone and vibe of the record swinging like a pendulum between these two ideas, oftentimes within the same song, let alone across the album's hour-long running time. It makes for a record that ebbs and flows quite beautifully, never letting any idea become stagnant or boring, always threatening to remove the mask of tranquility that's worn for a great deal of the album's runtime, forever keeping you on edge as to when the roar of fury is going to be let loose again. It's also surprisingly catchy in places too. The shortest and most single-esque song on the album of Black Moth is one I've caught myself idly humming the melody to quite often over the last week or so. Similarly, the driving riff in penultimate track Field of the Dead is up there with amongst the most stank-face-inducing riffs of the year, in a year that's seen some real horn throwers. Now, what I appreciate a lot about Sindar is that it is primarily the focus of just two people, but carries the energy, creativity, and overall vision of a project of a much grander scope and scale. Yes, there's a few folks who've come along with guest spots here and there, but much like progressive rock band Crownlands, also a duo, the overall impact and grandness of the experience here feels a lot more expansive than the output of just two people. Christian Lucy and Kona Osana have demonstrated a remarkable cohesiveness in their songwriting, managing to make for a record that flows like a raging river. It's constantly moving and evolving, never leaving room for boredom or frustration, always throwing new and engaging elements at you, but never feeling bloated or bogged down by overcomplicating the grand scheme of the album's intent. Now, I've gone on record as being a person who enjoys chaos, who thrives in the environment of musicians jettisoning the kitchen sink at the wall and working with whatever sticks. But Sindar, in a way, have done the exact opposite. Tower of the Sun has been crafted with some very select ingredients, making for a record that on face value can be seen as quite straightforward. There's big riffs, acoustic passages, light and dark from the vocals, and classic progressive rock stings and flourishes to keep you on your toes, but there's nothing unexpected or overall weird. This is not the place to come for a random hurdy-gurdy solo or a beatboxing vocal interlude, but in limiting their sonic palette to just what they need, Sindar have successfully crafted one of the more exciting and individualistic expressions of music within this Opeth-adjacent space. Rather than crutching on their influences, they've found the secret sauce to evolve this sound, to broaden it in their own way, while still making it appealing and comforting to anyone who's been looking for more of this type of musical expressionism. Yes, you're going to find people who'll point an accusatory finger and start screaming in a fashion akin to Invasion of the Body Snatchers that how dare a band sound very similar to another band. Shocker, I know. But when all is said and done, for all of its similarities to its influences, this record still manages to find its own identity, to sound uniquely Sindar, and it's scratching an itch I've needed scratching for a long time now. So if you'll excuse me, I've got some melancholic introspection to do, and the perfect soundtrack for which to do so with. So, what else can I possibly say about Sindar's Tower of the Sun? Finding new and emerging talent, having my head cracked open by them and getting to gush excitedly about how much I've been enjoying it is exactly what I started this channel to do, and Tower of the Sun in many ways embodies the whole mission statement of Rhyme Signatures. I'm still a small channel. I get excited when a video scores over 1,000 views, while some YouTube channels would consider it an abject failure to have anything less than 100,000 views on any given video. I'm in a niche space with a niche audience, reviewing albums in a niche space with a niche audience. But if this video can reach a few hundred people and convince them to check out Sindar, stream this album a bunch and maybe even buy it off Bandcamp, then that's mission accomplished for me. I love smaller bands, and I will always enjoyed talking about them over the bigger and more established acts within the genre. And with just a hair over 1,000 monthly listeners on Spotify at the moment, I would implore you all to help get that number significantly up. This duo are incredibly talented, they have such a passion and commitment to their craft, and have put out one of the most unexpectedly brilliant albums of the year with this one. Now, obviously, you can probably figure it out that my recommendation here is to definitely pick this one up on physical format. Get on board the Sindar train early here. Remember where you were before everyone got wind of them. And appreciate their dark melancholy, their stank-faced riffing, the fury in the growls and the vulnerability in their cleans, and think to yourself, oh hell yeah, these guys rock. This is all, of course, guys, just my opinion, so if you've heard this one, and if you loved it, or even if you hated it, please talk to me about your experiences with the album in the comments down below. Please do consider dropping me a thumbs up for the metrics, please tell your friends about little old me, and please do consider throwing me a subscription if you've been enjoying my irreverent content so far. But until next time, guys, as always, keep your rhyme signatures pretty odd.